Tonight is a good night to let the forest hold you for a while. Beneath the floor of an old forest, the roots of the tallest trees are not alone. They are wrapped in threads of fungus, finer than hair, woven into a hidden web that links one tree to the next, and the next, until a whole woodland is quietly tied together underground. Through that web, a dying tree can pass its last sugars to a seedling it will never see grown. A tree under attack may send a warning that some studies suggest can travel root to root, until neighbors it has never touched begin to raise their defenses. The trees themselves never move, never make a sound. And still, somehow, the message seems to arrive. How does a forest that stands silent for centuries manage to speak? Let the soil dark quiet settle over you. You are part of a living thing far larger than yourself. Join to it without trying, never as alone as you feel. Welcome to Sleepy Science Facts. Let that one quiet question carry us down into the dark together. There is a question that lives quietly beneath the forest floor, and it is the one we will follow tonight. How can trees that never move, never speak, and never reach toward one another, still somehow find a way to converse, stand among old trees, and the silence feels total? Yet under your feet, thread-like fungi weave through the soil, knitting, root to root, across distances no branch could ever bridge. Scientists call this hidden lattice the mycorrhizal network. Some have begun, only half in jest, to call the forest's wood wide web. What passes through it, and whether it truly counts as conversation, is the mystery we lower ourselves into now. Begin with the threads themselves. The fungi that form these networks send out hyphae, filaments so fine that thousands could lie side by side across a single fingernail. Bundled together, they form mycelium, a living mesh that fans outward through the dark. Researchers have estimated that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can hold several miles of these fungal threads, folded and tangled beyond counting. We tend to picture a forest as the trees we can see, but beneath them spreads something quieter and far vaster. It is a fabric of fungus holding the whole standing world in place from below. Now consider where root meets fungus. The word mycorrhiza comes from the Greek for fungus and root, and it names a partnership rather than a boundary. At the tips of a tree's finest roots, fungal threads wrap close or even slip between the root's own cells, until it grows hard to say where the tree ends and the fungus begins. This is not invasion. It is a handshake held for a lifetime. The tree, rooted and unmoving, finds in the fungus a way to reach soil it could never touch alone. And so the first thread of connection is not metaphor, but anatomy. What does the tree gain from holding that handshake reach? Above all, a tree's roots, for all their spread, can only draw water and minerals from the soil they physically occupy. Fungal threads are far finer and travel far farther. Threading into pores in the earth, no root could enter. Studies suggest the mycorrhizal partner can extend the effective reach of a root system many times over. Through it, the tree gathers phosphorus, nitrogen, and water from a volume of soil it alone would never feel. The unmoving tree, it turns out, is quietly held within a much larger grasp than its own. And what does the fungus take in return? It cannot make its own food. With no leaves and no light, the fungus lives instead on sugars the tree builds from sunlight and air. Research indicates a tree may pass a meaningful share of the carbon it captures down into its fungal partners. This is payment, in effect, for the water and minerals carried up. So the exchange runs both ways. Sun-made sugar flowing down, earth-drawn nutrients flowing up, through the same living threads. The question of how silent trees connect is already shifting beneath us. The first connection is not a message at all, but a trade neither partner could survive without. Picture the scale of this partnership. Scientists estimate that the great majority of land plants on Earth, by many counts more than 90%, live in some form of mycorrhizal relationship. This is not a rare arrangement found in special forests. It is closer to the rule of life on land, a quiet condition shared by nearly everything that grows roots. When you walk through almost any woodland, meadow, or garden, you are walking above a partnership so widespread, it is easy to forget it is there at all. Connection, on this scale, begins to look less like an exception and more like the ground itself. How old is this arrangement? Far older than forests. Fossil evidence suggests that fungi and the earliest land plants were already partnered roughly 400 million years ago, back when plants had barely begun to leave the water. Some researchers think these fungal threads may have served as the first roots plants ever had, drawing minerals from bare rock before true roots evolved. If that is so, then life did not climb onto land alone. It came ashore already joined to a partner. And the instinct to be connected may be nearly as old as the green world itself, woven in from the very beginning. Return to the present and to a single tree. Below one mature forest tree, the fungal network may link it to dozens of neighbors at once, not only its own kind, but other species entirely. The threads do not respect the tidy boundaries we draw between one tree and the next. A birch and a fir, strangers above ground, may share the same fungal partner below, their roots wired into a common web. Slowly, the picture changes. The forest is not a crowd of separate individuals standing near one another. It is something more woven, more shared, than the spaces between the trunks ever let us guess. This is where one researcher's name enters the story. In the 1990s, the Canadian ecologist Suzanne Simard ran a careful experiment in the forests of British Columbia. She grew paper birch and Douglas fir together and fed them carbon dioxide tagged with traceable isotopes. One kind of carbon for the birch, another for the fir. Then she waited and looked for where each labeled carbon ended up. The work, later published in the journal Nature, would become one of the most cited and most debated studies of the forest underground. What she found is the next thread we follow. The question of whether trees can connect was about to gain its strongest evidence yet. What Sim had found was movement. The carbon she had fed to the birch turned up inside the fir, and carbon from the fir appeared in the birch, both isotopes traveling underground, tree to tree, through the shared fungal network. Something was passing between separate trees of different species, along the threads that linked them. If the deepest exchange in a forest does not stop at the edge of a single tree, then the question we began with has quietly turned. Perhaps the forest's conversation is not made of words at all, but of substance, carbon itself, moving from one living thing into another beneath the ground. But notice the caution the science itself insists on. That carbon moved is not in dispute. What it means is harder. Did the birch send carbon to help the fir, or did it simply leak into a shared network from which the fir happened to draw? Researchers have argued this point for years, and the honest answer is that movement alone does not prove intention. It is worth holding both truths at once. The connection is real and measurable, and yet, what travels through it may be exchange without purpose, generosity without a giver. The thread is there. What flows along it? We are still learning to read. Consider the direction the carbon traveled, because it carried a hint. In Simard's work, more carbon tended to move toward the trees that needed it most, flowing, en balance, from the sunlit birch towards firs growing in shade, where light was scarce. A network that simply leaked would not, on its own, favor the needy. That tilt toward the shaded and the struggling is part of what made the finding feel almost tender. Whether we call it sharing or merely physics following a gradient, the result looks the same from below. What one tree had to spare drifted toward another that was going without. There is a phrase that grew from this work, and it is worth meeting carefully. Simard describes certain large, old trees as mother trees, hubs that, in her findings, were linked to many younger trees around them through especially rich fungal connections. Through those links, the data suggested carbon and nutrients could pass from the old giants toward seedlings struggling in the shade below. The word mother is a human word, and scientists rightly debate how far to carry it. But the structure it points to is real. In many forests, the oldest trees sit at the center of the densest web, holding the most threads. Stay with those old trees a moment longer. Because they are large and have grown for centuries, mother trees often reach the canopy and the fullest light, building sugar in abundance. Their root systems are vast, their fungal connections many. Research suggests that through these connections, a single old tree may be linked to hundreds of younger ones across the forest. Whatever we decide to call it, the shape is striking. The beings with the most to give are the ones woven into the most lives. The forest's deepest connections seem to gather, again and again, around what has stood the longest. What happens to that web when a great tree dies? Simard's later research followed dying mother trees and reported something quietly moving in the data. As an old tree declined, it appeared to release pulses of carbon down through its fungal links toward its neighbors and kin, as if passing on what it could no longer hold. Scientists still debate the mechanism, whether this is a final gift or simply a body breaking down and its stores draining outward. But either way, nothing in this network is truly wasted. What one tree spent a lifetime gathering does not vanish when it falls. It moves on, into the standing. Here, something subtle has shifted in the ground beneath our question. We began by asking how silent, unmoving trees could converse, imagining, perhaps, some exchange of signals passed back and forth. But what the network shows is stranger and gentler than any signaling. It is that no tree in a forest stands fully alone. Each one is reached into, fed into, drawn from, held within a fabric far larger than itself. The conversation, if that is even the word for it, is less like speech and more like belonging. And belonging, unlike speech, does not require that anyone ever find the right words to already be part of it. Consider what travels along these threads besides carbon. Researchers have traced nitrogen, phosphorus, and water moving through mycorrhizal networks as well, the very nutrients that a struggling seedling, trapped in deep shade, most often lacks. A young tree on the forest floor may receive only a fraction of the light it needs, yet still hold on, year after year, in the dimness. Part of how it survives that long wait, the evidence suggests, is that it is not surviving only on its own. Through the web below, it appears to be quietly subsidized by the forest around it, kept alive until its own chance at the light arrives. This network does not only carry gifts, it may carry warnings. Some experiments have found that when one plant is attacked by aphids or other pests, plants connected to it through a shared fungal network may begin raising their own chemical defenses, as though a signal of danger had passed between them, underground. The findings are still being tested and debated, and scientists are careful not to overstate them. But the possibility is remarkable. A threat, felt by one tree, might ready its neighbors before the danger reaches them. Connection, it seems, may sometimes mean being warned by a kin you will never see. Pause on that word, kin, because the network may seem to know it. In one striking line of Simard's research, Douglas fir mother trees appear to send more carbon to seedlings that were their own offspring than to unrelated seedlings nearby. The mechanism is still being studied, and recognition is a heavy word to lay on a tree. A recent review has argued that the evidence for true kin recognition in trees is weaker than the popular story suggests, and the question remains genuinely open. Yet the pattern in the data, contested as it is, leans the same way our oldest hopes do. That to be known, even underground, might be to be favored. But hold the skepticism alongside the wonder, because good science demands it. Not every researcher reads these findings the same way. Some have argued that the evidence for trees deliberately helping one another is weaker than the popular story suggests. That much of what looks like sharing could be fungi acting in their own interest, moving nutrients for their own ends, with trees as bystanders. This debate is not a flaw in the story. It is the story being told honestly. The threads are real, and the movement is real. What remains genuinely open is the why. And a mystery still under honest debate is a richer thing than a fairy tale agreed upon too soon. Let the fungus have its due in this. From the fungus's view, the forest is not a collection of trees, but a single shared pantry. And it may simply be moving sugar from where there is plenty to where there is little, the way water finds its level. If that is all it is, the network loses none of its beauty. For even a web built on no one's intention still ends with carbon reaching the shaded seedling, still ends with the dying tree stores flowing into the living. Sometimes we are held up by systems that never meant to hold us. The being supported is no less real for being unplanned. Return to the soil's strange arithmetic. Through this underground fabric, a forest can behave, in some ways, less like many separate organisms and more like one. Carbon pooled here, drawn there, one tree's surplus quietly becoming another's survival. Some scientists have begun to speak of the forest as a kind of superorganism, though others find the term too strong. What is not in question is the connectedness itself, the simple, measurable fact that what happens to one tree does not stay with that tree. In a forest, no fortune and no hardship is ever fully private. Everything that falls reaches, at last, into something else. Think of the seedling again, the small one in the shade. By every visible measure, it stands apart, overshadowed, outcompeted, too far from the light to thrive on its own terms. And yet it lives. It lives because, unseen, it was folded into a web it did not build and cannot perceive. Fed by trees it will never recognize as having helped it. There is a quiet truth lying in the soil here, the kind that loosens something in the chest. The sense of being unreached among many, of standing in a crowd, yet touched by none, may be one of the most convincing illusions there is, and one of the least true beneath the surface. Let the small seedling you just pictured stay with you a moment. The one that looks alone in the shade yet is quietly fed from below by trees it cannot see. Notice how easily a thing can be reached and supported and never know it. The question we lowered ourselves into is beginning to turn beneath us. The silence between the trees was never proof of separation. It only meant the connection was happening somewhere we weren't looking. Let your breath slow and lengthen, the way roots reach without hurry. There is nothing here for you to solve, and no one you need to answer. Whatever has felt unreachable in you tonight, let it simply rest in the dark soil of this hour, while we follow these threads a little deeper. We have met the threads already, but now we can sink into how they live. The fungal filaments we called hyphae do not lie still in the soil. Inside each tube flows a slow-living stream, drifting nutrients and water from one stretch of the mesh toward another. When part of the mycelium reaches richer ground, the flow can shift to carry resources to where they are needed most. The fungus has no brain and no plan. It simply responds, thread by thread, to what the soil offers. And yet the whole begins to behave like a system that senses and adjusts. A quiet logic, running without anyone deciding it should. Stay with that trade between fungus and root, because its terms are remarkable. Trees pull carbon from the air and turn sunlight into sugar, but they cannot conjure water and minerals scattered thinly through the soil. So they hand a share of their sugar downward, and in return, the fungal threads reach into spaces far too fine for roots and deliver water. Nitrogen and phosphorus back up. We have named this exchange once already. What deepens it here is the realization of how constant it is. Every hour the tree stands, this bargain is being struck again beneath it. Sugar for minerals, light for soil, without a single pause. We touched the age of this partnership earlier, but the depth of that age is worth feeling, not just stating, before there were leaves, before there were trees, before there were forests, in any form we would know. The bond between root and fungus already held. Some scientists believe plants may never have left the water at all without fungi to feed their first fragile roots. So the wood wide web is older than wood itself. The connection beneath the soil came first, and the forest grew up around it. What looks like a recent discovery is really one of the most ancient agreements life ever made. Lower yourself toward how a single mushroom fits into all this. A mushroom is not the fungus itself. It is only the structure the fungus pushes up to release spores, the brief fruit of a body that lives spread through the dark soil. A single mushroom can scatter billions of spores in a few days, drifting on the wind to begin new networks far away. So the quiet thing under the forest is also patiently seeding the next forest, and the one after that. What looks like stillness on the ground is a slow, ceaseless reaching outward, generation laid carefully upon generation. We have already followed Simard's traced carbon from one tree into another. Here, let the meaning settle rather than the method. Sugar made by a single tree, was found arriving inside its neighbor, carried along the fungal threads that linked their roots. The trees were not isolated competitors, after all. They were quietly sharing, through a network none of them could see, the very substance that kept them alive. The evidence had been under the soil the whole time, waiting for someone to label a breath of carbon and follow where it went. What changed was not the forest, but our willingness to look beneath it. The flow through that network is not random, and the pattern is gentle. Resources tend to move toward the trees that need them most, drifting from those with plenty toward seedlings sitting in deep shade, unable to make enough sugar of their own. No tree organizes this, and we should be careful not to read a plan into it. But the result looks, from below, remarkably like a community quietly tending its young. Whether the cause is intention or only the physics of a gradient, the effect is the same. What one tree can spare keeps finding its way, again and again, toward whatever is going without. What travels through this network is not only food. Some studies report that when a tree is attacked by insects, signals of that stress can move through the fungal links toward neighbors nearby, which have then been found to ready their own chemical defenses. The mechanism and significance of this underground signaling remain contested, and researchers caution that it is not yet firmly established. Still, the possibility is striking. A forest under threat may be less a crowd of strangers than something closer to a body, where a wound in one place is somehow registered, faintly, in another. The honest position is wonder held alongside doubt. The network can carry harm as well as help, and that honesty matters. Some plants tap into the fungal web without paying their share, taking sugar while giving nothing back. There are even plants with no green leaves at all, living entirely on carbon drawn from trees through the shared threads. The wood wide web is not a fairy tale of perfect kindness. It is a real biological system, with cheaters and competition woven in beside the cooperation. And somehow, across all of that, the forest as a whole still holds together. Connection, it turns out, never required that every participant be generous, only that the web keep running. The fungi themselves are far stranger and larger than their threads suggest. What surfaces as a small mushroom is only the fruit of something immense below, a body that may spread silently through the soil across distances no single glance could take in. Some fungal networks are counted among the largest and oldest living things on Earth, almost all of them hidden underground. Not every forest fungus grows to such a size, but the principle holds. The mushroom is only the tip. The organism is the soil itself, alive and reaching in every direction, patient beyond anything the eye, above ground, would ever guess. Linger on that idea of a body that is mostly invisible. We are used to thinking of a living thing as something we can see and touch and circle with our eyes. But the true body of a forest fungus is the mycelium threaded through the dark, vast and formless, and almost entirely out of sight. The little mushroom is just where it briefly breaks the surface. Most of what is alive in a forest, it turns out, is not the green we admire, but the pale web below, doing its work without color, without shape we can grasp, without ever asking to be seen. The connections do not stop at the edges of one tree's roots. A mature forest can be laced together into a single underground web, where most of the trees are linked, directly or through a few steps, to most of the others. Researchers who mapped one Canadian forest found nearly every tree tied into the same network. Pull on one thread, and the whole fabric answers. The forest is not a collection of separate lives standing side by side. It is closer to a single shared system, breathing and trading and signaling beneath a surface that gives almost no hint of how connected it truly is. This changes what a tree even is. Standing alone, a tree looks like an individual, sealed off, competing with its neighbors for light and space. But once you can see the network, that picture dissolves. A tree is a node in a web, fed by fungi, linked to its neighbors, sometimes nursed by elders, and sometimes nursing the young. Its boundaries are far softer than its bark suggests. Much of what keeps it alive happens outside its own body, in threads it does not own and cannot control. The solitary tree of our imagination turns out to be held, constantly, by everything around it. The pattern we named at the start repeats almost everywhere we look. From towering forests to the grass in a meadow to crops in a field. Most of the green world is quietly wired into fungal threads below. This is not an oddity found in a few special forests. It is closer to the default condition of life on land. Wherever plants have grown and thrived, fungi have almost always grown with them. Underground, unseen. The fact that nearly all land plants live this way is easy to forget precisely because it is so common, holding the whole living surface of the planet from beneath. And these networks are slow, in the patient way of the soil. A fungal web does not appear in a season. It builds over years and decades, thread by thread, as trees grow and roots reach and fungi spread to meet them. An old forest carries an old network, woven over lifetimes, far richer than anything young ground can hold. When such a forest is cleared, the loss is not only the trees you can see falling, it is the invisible web of connections beneath, the work of generations, that cannot be replanted in an afternoon. Some things the earth makes only with time. Here is what the soil has been showing, layer by quiet layer. Underneath what looks like solitude, the trees were never standing alone. The connection was already there, woven into the ground before any single tree arrived, and waiting to take it in. To live as a forest tree is to be joined by threads you never asked for and cannot see, to everything growing around you, The reaching toward one another is not something the forest learns or chooses. It is simply what living things do when they grow close enough, down where no one is watching. So how can silent trees, rooted and unmoving, carry word to one another through the dark of the soil? You have already seen the threads that make it possible. Stay here a little longer, where the forest keeps trading and signaling beneath your feet, and let the ground hold the question for you. There is nothing to reach for now. The network underneath is doing the reaching the way it always has. Now we turn the web a quarter turn and look at it as architecture. For every tree you can see, a network of fungal filaments spreads through the soil around its roots, finer than the finest hair, linking that single tree to dozens of its neighbors at once. What looks like a crowd of separate trunks standing apart is, underground, a single woven fabric. The separateness you see above the soil is mostly an illusion of the light. We met these threads as biology in the first descent. Here, see them as shape. A vast, irregular lattice, drawn not by any architect but by roots and fungi, quietly finding each other. Trees that seem to stand alone are quietly feeding one another, and the direction of that feeding has its own grace. Following Simard's labeled carbon, a birch in summer was found sending sugar to a shaded fir, and in autumn, the fir appeared to send some back. The exchange ran both directions, following need rather than ownership. No tree was keeping score. We need not decide tonight whether this is true sharing or only nutrients sliding down a gradient. Either way, in the dark soil, what one had extra seemed to move toward what another lacked, as if abundance could not bear to sit still beside scarcity. The oldest, largest trees act as quiet anchors for those around them. Simard called them mother trees, and the name has stuck in the science, though scientists debate how far to carry such a human word. These giants tend to be connected to the most seedlings through the densest tangle of fungal links, and the data suggest extra sugar can pass toward the young saplings struggling in their shade. In some of Simard's experiments, a fir appeared to send more carbon to seedlings that were its own offspring, though researchers still debate how far to read recognition into this. Standing at the center of so many connections, such a tree is never truly alone. The forest may send warnings through the soil, and the idea is worth meeting carefully. When one tree is attacked by insects or disease, it releases chemical signals, and some experiments suggest that signals of that stress can move through the fungal links so that nearby trees begin readying their own defenses. Yet scientists caution that this underground warning is not yet firmly established, and that much of a plant's alarm travels through the air rather than the roots. A tree wounded on one side of a grove might, the evidence hints, prepare a tree that has felt nothing yet. The possibility is tender. The certainty is not there. The fungi are not servants in this arrangement. They are partners with their own hunger. in exchange for carrying water and minerals like phosphorus to the trees. The fungal network takes sugar in return, a meaningful share of what the tree makes through sunlight. Neither side could thrive without the other. The tree cannot drink the deep soil alone, and the fungus cannot make food from light. What looks like generosity is also a kind of belonging. Two unlike lives that long ago stopped being able to imagine themselves apart. The bond is older than the very trees you are standing under tonight. This underground partnership is not a recent invention, but an ancient inheritance. And the depth of that age bears repeating gently here. The earliest land plants had no proper roots at all. They relied on fungi to gather water and nutrients for them. In other words, plants may never have left the ocean without a partner waiting in the soil to hold them. Connection was not something life learned later, as a comfort added on. It was there at the beginning, the quiet condition that made standing on dry ground possible at all. What stands tallest today rests on a bond struck before there were forests to stand in. Most of the green world is plugged into some version of this hidden web, and it helps to picture how ordinary that makes it. From the tallest redwood to the small grass at the edge of a path, the partnership is closer to a rule of life on land than a rare exception. The plant you walked past today, the one that looked entirely self-contained, was almost certainly drawing on threads it never chose and cannot see. To be a plant on this planet, nearly always to be joined to something else, underground. Self-sufficiency in the green world is mostly a trick of how little we see. The network does not only carry kindness, it carries everything, including what the trees would rather refuse. The same threads that move sugar and signals can also move harmful compounds, and some plants release toxins through the web to suppress their rivals. The connection is honest rather than gentle. It does not pretend the forest is only cooperation. Yet even this is a form of relationship, a conversation with consequences, not a wall of silence. The trees are entangled in each other's lives whether the news is good or not. Being joined, it turns out, was never the same as being safe. It was simply never being separate. Now multiply the small across the vast and let the numbers loosen. We have already counted several miles of fungal thread in a single teaspoon of soil. Spread that proportion across an entire woodland, and the figures stop meaning anything the mind can picture. A web so dense and so wide that no map could ever draw it. And yet it is working right now, in soil, somewhere near you, threading life to life in the dark, without a sound. The quiet you imagine in a sleeping forest is not emptiness. It is the hush of an enormous exchange that never needed daylight or a voice to keep every living thing in touch. What the soil has been showing, thread by thread, is hard to unsee. In a forest, standing apart is the appearance, and being connected is the fact. The trees did not decide to join the network the way one decides to make a friend. They are woven in from the root, by something far older than choice. The same way your own body was built to reach toward others before you ever understood why. The loneliness a crowd can press into a person is real, but it sits on top of a deeper architecture that says otherwise. Underneath the feeling of being one separate trunk among many, the threads have already been running the whole time. You just heard that the trees only look like they are standing alone, that under the soil they were joined from the very start, woven in before any of them could choose it. If something in you tightened at that, the way being surrounded by people can somehow leave you feeling unreached. Let that be noticed rather than fixed. The ache of feeling apart in a crowd is real, and it does not have to be argued away tonight. Feel where your breath sits in your chest right now, and let it settle a little lower, a little slower. The threads in the forest soil are not trying to convince anything. They simply hold, quietly, whether or not the trees can feel them. The deeper we go from here, the more the ground keeps saying the same thing. Let us follow it down a while longer. The web beneath a forest does not measure time the way we do. We have set the partnership's age at hundreds of millions of years already. What matters now is the contrast with a single life. Individual trees come and go in centuries, but the relationship itself has outlasted whole forests, isage, and mountain ranges. When a sapling sends its first root into the dark, it is reaching into a connection that was ancient before the dinosaurs. The threads were here long before this woodland, and they will be here long after it is gone. A tree is a brief guest in a very old house. To the fungus, a tree's whole lifetime is barely a chapter. Some mycelial networks persist in the same patch of ground for thousands of years, far outliving the trees they link. As one tree dies and another germinates in its place, the underground web simply reroots, absorbing the loss and threading the newcomer in without pause. The forest you see is a passing surface. The network is the deeper, slower thing that holds across the centuries. A tree is born into a connection. It did not start and will not finish. A structure that was patiently waiting to receive it and will keep going once it is gone. The largest living thing on Earth is one of these underground organisms, and it has been growing quietly for millennia. In Oregon's Malheur National Forest, a single honey fungus, Armillaria ostoyae, spreads its threads across roughly 3.7 square miles of soil. Estimates put its age at around 2,400 years, and possibly far older. For all that time, it has been one continuous, connected body, expanding only a few feet a year in total silence. Nothing about it is sudden. Some of the largest, oldest presences on this planet are not towering above us, but woven patiently through the ground beneath our feet. Mountains and forests rise and fall, but the partnership in the soil simply persists. Through the rise of flowering plants, the spread of grasslands, and 5 mass extinctions, the basic bargain between root and fungus held. whatever else the planet lost. This quiet exchange of sugar for minerals kept being struck in soil after soil. It is one of the most durable agreements life has ever made. The arrangement did not need to be reinvented each era. It was inherited, intact, the way a deep habit is passed down without anyone deciding to keep it. Some forms of belonging are simply too useful for life to ever let go. The threads grow at the unhurried pace of living things, not machines. A fungal filament feels its way through the soil, around grains of sand and stone, taking days to cross what your hand could span in a moment. There is no rush in it, no deadline. It moves the way roots move and water seeps, at the speed of patience. And yet, given enough quiet years, this slowness builds something vast. The forest's hidden network was not laid down in a burst of effort. It accumulated, thread by unhurried thread, the way trust between living things tends to, too slowly to watch, too steadily to stop. When a tree finally dies, it does not simply vanish from the network. Its decaying roots and trunk become food drawn back into the web of fungal threads and passed along to the living. The carbon it gathered over a long life is not lost. It is loosened back into the soil and recirculated to the seedlings and neighbors still standing. In the slow economy of the forest, nothing is wasted, and nothing truly leaves. A fallen tree keeps giving for decades after its last leaf, its substance quietly rejoining the bodies of others. Even in dying, it stays part of the exchange. It spent its life inside. Some of the carbon moving through these threads has been underground for an astonishingly long time. Fungal networks help lock vast amounts of carbon into the soil, where it can rest for centuries before being released. The ground beneath an old forest is not inert. It is a slow vault, holding the breath of trees that died long before anyone living was born. Each autumn adds another faint layer to a store that the network has been tending since before recorded history. What feels like quiet, empty soil is in fact a deep memory of every forest that ever stood here, kept by threads too fine to see. The scale of this hidden web, counted across the whole planet, leaves the mind with nothing to hold. If you tried to lay all its fungal threads end to end, you would be measuring a length the mind cannot picture, far past any distance a person has ever traveled or imagined traveling. These are not numbers a person can really grasp. They are quantities a person can only stand beneath, the way one stands beneath a night sky. And every fraction of that unimaginable length is doing the same small thing, joining one root to another, one life to the next, in the patient dark. Every year, the world's plants quietly hand an enormous gift to the fungi in the soil. Researchers have recently estimated that land plants may channel something like 13 billion tons of carbon dioxide, drawn from the air, down into their fungal partners each year. a flow that may be comparable to a large share of humanity's fossil fuel emissions. If those estimates hold, this is not a small side deal of nature. It is one of the great movements of carbon on Earth, and it happens entirely out of sight. The exchange you cannot see between roots and threads may be among the largest acts of giving on the planet. A single network can hold many different species in one shared web. The same underground threads can connect oaks to firs, birches to pines, and shrubs to the grasses between them, carrying resources across the boundaries we use to keep species apart. In the soil, the categories blur. A fir and a birch, so different above ground, are simply two nodes on one continuous fabric below it. The network does not seem to care what kind of tree it joins. Its only logic is connection, drawing the unlike together, threading difference into a single living tissue, as if separateness were the problem it existed to solve. The youngest seedlings, too small to feed themselves, may be carried by the web until they can stand. A sapling on the shaded forest floor can receive much of its early carbon, not from its own thin leaves, but through fungal threads from the larger trees around it. For its first vulnerable years, it appears to live partly on the surplus of elders it has never touched and cannot recognize. The forest does not let its young fall simply because they are not yet strong. It feeds them through the dark, on credit, the way every generation is quietly carried for a while by the ones that came before. The network's patience shows most clearly in how slowly it rebuilds. When a forest is cleared, the rich, underground web does not return in a season. It can take decades, sometimes longer, for the threads to weave back through the soil to their old density. The connection is easy to break and slow to restore, built at the pace of deep time, not human time. This is why an old forest feels different underfoot than a young one. Beneath it lies a web that took centuries to form. What grows slowly, holds deeply, and what is woven over lifetimes is not quickly made again. Across all these years and miles, the web never announces itself. There is no signal a passing animal could hear, no light, no motion at the surface to betray the immense activity below. The largest, oldest, busiest structures in a forest do their work in total silence and complete darkness, asking no notice and receiving none. The quiet of a still woodland is not the quiet of nothing happening. It is the quiet of something enormous happening without needing to be seen. The most fundamental connections holding the forest together have never once required an audience to keep faithfully running. The threads do not only join the present, they bind the forest to its own deep past. The fungi in the soil today are the descendants of fungi that partnered with the first plants ever to leave the water, carrying forward a way of living that has not fundamentally changed in hundreds of millions of years. When a modern root meets a modern thread, it is repeating one of the oldest gestures life on land has ever made. Nothing about the meeting is new. It is an ancien reunion, performed again in fresh soil. Connection rehearsed so many times, it has become instinct in the very tissue of living things. After everything the soil has shown, the question we began with starts to turn beneath our feet. We wondered how trees that look so separate could possibly be in touch. And the answer the ground keeps giving is that they were never built to be separate at all. The reaching toward one another is not an achievement some forests manage and others fail at. It is written into root and thread from the start, far older than any single tree's solitude. What looked like a feat of communication is closer to a condition of being alive on land. The deeper we go, the more connection seems inherited rather than earned. Even drought and damage move through the forest as shared experience, not private hardship. When some trees in a network face stress, signals and resources can shift through the threads toward the ones suffering most, spreading the burden across many bodies instead of letting it fall on one. The forest does not have a way of leaving a tree to face hardship entirely alone. The architecture itself redistributes the strain. What would be unbearable for a single trunk becomes survivable when it is carried by the whole. The web turns isolated crisis into something held in common, difficulty divided quietly among everything still standing. The network has its own slow memory of who is connected to whom. Over years, the threads thicken along the roots most used, strengthening the links between trees that repeatedly share resources, the way a path deepens with walking. The web is not a fixed wiring diagram, but a living record of relationship, shaped by every exchange that has passed through it. The connections a forest uses most become its strongest. Beneath the soil, the history is written not in words, but in the patient thickening of threads. A map of belonging drawn slowly by use, remembering, in its own way, every bond that ever mattered. From space, you would never guess that a continent's forests are, in some sense, one connected skin. Yet, patch by patch, network by network, nearly all the green land on Earth is laced through with these underground threads. Each woodland its own vast web. No single network spans the planet, but the same pattern of connection runs through almost every forest, grassland, and meadow there is. The Earth's living surface is not a scatter of separate plants. It is a tissue, repeated everywhere, of life, joined to life beneath the soil. Wherever roots go down on this planet, threads are nearly always waiting to weave them in. The web asks for nothing in the way of gratitude or even awareness. A tree does not know it is connected. A seedling does not understand that it is being fed. The fungus does not comprehend the forest it sustains. The whole immense system runs without a single participant, grasping the shape of it. Belonging here is not a feeling anyone has. It is simply a fact of how things are built. And there is a strange comfort in that the connection does not depend on being noticed or earned or returned in kind. It holds the forest together, whether or not anything in the forest ever feels held. What the threads carry, in the end, is continuity itself. Through them, the dead feed the living, the old feed the young, and the strong steady the weak, across spans of time no single life could ever witness. The network is how a forest stays, one forest through endless turnover, how it remains continuous even as every individual within it is replaced. It is less a thing than a process, the ongoing act of staying joined, repeated so faithfully across the centuries that the forest never has to start over. Each tree inherits the connection whole and passes it on unbroken, never having to invent it alone. This way of living is so old that it shaped what plants became. Because the first land plants could lean on fungi for water and minerals, they were freed to grow in ways a fully solitary organism never could, eventually rising into the towering forests we know. The reaching trunk, the spreading canopy, these were built on a foundation of partnership laid down at the very beginning. Plants did not first become strong and then, later, learn to connect. They became what they are because they were connected from the outset. The grandeur above the soil was only ever possible because of the bond beneath it. The forest's deepest architecture is not the trunk, but the thread. We tend to think of a tree as the real thing, and the roots and fungi as mere support. But in deep time, the relationship runs the other way. Trees are the temporary expression. The underground partnership is the lasting structure that keeps producing them. The visible forest is something the network grows, the way a long-lived being grows new cells. What endures is not any single tree, but the patient web that keeps weaving trees into being. The most permanent thing in the woods is the very thing we cannot see. Lay all of this beside the loneliness a person can feel, and something quietly gives way. In a forest, to be a tree is to be joined, not occasionally, not as a reward for reaching out, but constitutionally, from the root, by an arrangement hundreds of millions of years old. Connection is not the achievement. It is the starting condition. The same is closer to true of us than we usually let ourselves believe. The reaching toward others is not a skill some people have and others lack. It is built into what living things are, an instinct as deep as roots. We were never assembled to stand alone. The trees that look most solitary are often the most connected of all. The great old giant standing apart in a clearing, seeming to need no one, is usually the very tree linked to the most others underground, the hub that feeds the most seedlings and anchors the widest web. It's apparent independence. So it can be with a person who seems most self-sufficient. The look of standing apart and the fact of being deeply joined are not opposites in nature. They routinely live in the same trunk. Solitude on the surface has never ruled out belonging at the root. Here, at last, is what the soil has been patiently arguing all along. Connection is not something a living thing achieves, but something it is made of, The forest does not become connected. It begins connected and could not be a forest otherwise. The threads were never a clever addition to life on land. They were the condition that made it possible, written into roots and into us alike as an instinct older than choice. Whatever sense of separateness sits on the surface of a life, underneath it runs the same deep architecture that holds the forest. Reaching, joined, never once truly alone. The web you have been hearing about runs entirely on its own now. No tree willing it. No seedling aware of it. The threads simply joining root to root in the dark, the way they have for hundreds of millions of years. Let that same quiet truth move through you. The reaching toward others that can feel so hard, so effortful, so easily failed at, is not something you have to manufacture tonight. Like the forest, you were joined from the root, long before you understood the word for it. You can set down the work of proving you belong. Nothing in the soil is straining to connect, and nothing in you needs to either. The deepest thing the night has been circling is very close now, that the feeling of being unreached among many sits only on the surface, while underneath, the threads have been holding all along. Let the breath slow, and let us drift the last of the way down toward it. Beneath every forest you have walked through, the fungal threads outnumber the roots they wrap around by a margin almost too large to picture. Folded and braided through the dark, they were already there before you arrived, and they will keep weaving long after the last footstep fades. We have measured their density before. What stays with you now is simpler. The forest you see is only the part that stands above a quieter, older one, and that older one never sleeps. The mycorrhizal network does not belong to any single tree. A young seedling sprouting in deep shade, too starved of light to feed itself, can be kept alive for years by sugar flowing in through fungal threads from larger trees nearby. The donors are not its parents. In any sense the seedling would know. They simply give, through a web that treats need as a kind of address. No one tree decides this. The whole quietly arranges it, and the small one lives. Consider what travels through these threads. Sugars made from sunlight, nitrogen pulled from the soil, phosphorus, water, and faint chemical signals that may warn of insects chewing somewhere down the line. The network is less a set of pipes than a slow conversation, carried in molecules instead of words. And it has been holding that conversation uninterrupted since long before any language existed to describe it. What moves below is older than every word we have for it. A tree under attack by aphids can release warning compounds, and some studies suggest that signals of that stress may move through the fungal web so that connected trees begin readying their defenses. Researchers caution that the underground part of this is not yet firmly settled. Still, the image lingers. A forest, it seems, may flinch together, faintly, beneath the soil, while the canopy above stays perfectly still and gives nothing away. The largest known mycorrhizal networks stretch across entire stands of forest, linking hundreds of trees into a single connected fabric. Some of the central, most heavily linked trees, sometimes called hub trees, anchor dozens of younger ones at once, feeding and signaling in every direction. Remove one, and the whole web shifts to compensate. The forest does not stand as a crowd of strangers. It stands as something woven, where the loss of one is felt and answered by many. When an old tree is dying, researchers have observed what looks like a release of its stored carbon into the network, drifting toward its neighbors and kin in its final season. Whether this is a deliberate gift or simply a fading body letting its stores drain outward, scientists still debate. But the result is the same below. The departing tree does not hold everything to itself. What it gathered flows back into the web that held it. Death, in the soil, is less a severing than a last passing on. Fungi reach places roots cannot. Their threads are thin enough to slip between grains of sand, into pockets of moisture and minerals no root could ever enter. In exchange for sugar, they hand the tree water and nutrients gathered from a volume of soil far larger than the roots alone could reach. Neither partner could thrive without the other. They have been each other's hands for a very long time, far longer than there have been forests to shelter the trade. This partnership is older than flowers, older than seeds, older than the first forests. When plants first crept from water onto bare land, they had no real roots, and fossils show fungal threads already braided into those earliest stems, drawing water from stone. Life did not colonize the land alone. It came ashore, holding hands with the fungi, and it has never once let go. The reaching we keep returning to was there at the very first step out of the sea. Nearly all the land plants alive today form these fungal partnerships. The grass beneath your window, the trees along your street, the crops that become your food. Almost all of them are quietly fed through threads you will never see. The green world is not a collection of separate, self-made things. It is a single, interlaced surface, stitched together underground into something closer to one body than many. Self-made, it turns out, was never quite true of anything that grows. Some researchers report faint electrical pulses traveling through fungal threads when a tree is touched, wounded, or stressed. Patterns that shift and repeat in ways they are still working to read. This is early, contested work, and no one yet claims to know what, if anything, it means. But it hints that something information-like may be moving through the soil at all hours. A forest may be quieter than we are. It is not, it seems, ever, entirely, still down below. Trees of entirely different species share the same network, trading resources across the boundaries we draw between them. A birch and a fir, which we file into separate categories, can pass sugar back and forth through fungal threads, depending on which one has light to spare that season. The web does not honor the lines we draw. Beneath the soil, the forest has already decided that the distinctions barely matter. That need is need, whatever name is fastened to the trunk above. The fungi themselves can be vast, single organisms. The honey fungus we met in Oregon, spreading across several square miles and likely thousands of years old, is among the largest living things on Earth, almost all of it threaded invisibly through the ground. You could walk across such a being for an hour and never know you stood, the whole time, on the body of one ancient, living thing, patient and pale, and reaching beneath your feet. None of this requires anything from you. The sharing, the signaling, the slow handing back of carbon from the dying to the young, it runs on its own, hour after hour, with no overseer and no permission asked. The forest does not wait to be tended before it tends itself. What we have been tracing tonight was never a system that needed watching. It was a quiet web that simply, endlessly, holds, whether or not anyone is awake to know it. The carbon a tree pulls from the air does not stay with that tree. It moves into the soil, into the fungi, into neighbors and seedlings, into the slow bank of the network, where it may rest for decades. Nothing here is wholly owned. Everything is on loan, circulating through a web wide enough that the question of where one life ends and another begins to lose its edges. Ownership, in the soil, was always a story the surface told. And here, gently, is what all of this has been showing. You were taught to see a forest as many separate trees competing for light. And underneath, it turns out, they are feeding each other, perhaps warning each other, carrying each other through the lean years on threads no eye can see. What looked like a crowd of strangers was always a single connected body. Apartness was the illusion. The web was the truth all along. The same kind of connection shapes you more than you know. The trees in your street pull carbon from the very breath you exhaled this morning, and the oxygen filling your lungs right now passed, not long ago, through leaves fed by these unseen threads. You are not watching the network from outside. You are inside the exchange, breathing with it, part of the same slow trade that the soil has been carrying on since long before you drew your first breath. A forest cut off from its network grows weaker, slower to recover, quicker to fall ill, more easily lost to drought. Connection is not a luxury laid over survival. For the trees, it is survival. To be linked is simply what it means, down in the soil, to be alive at all. Aloneness, for a tree, is not independence. It is the beginning of being unwell. The web is not decoration on life. It is the shape life takes when it lasts. The threads do not rest when the sun goes down. Through the night, sugar keeps moving, water keeps rising, signals keep passing tree to tree in the dark. The forest does its quiet trading, whether the canopy is lit or shadowed, whether anyone is awake to witness it or not. The work of holding one another does not pause for nightfall. If anything, in the cool and the stillness, it deepens, the way the most faithful things tend to What we call a forest is, beneath the ground, a single, ongoing act of giving, without ledger, without debt, without anyone keeping count of who owes whom. Resources flow toward need and away from surplus, again and again, in a generosity so constant it stopped being a choice long ago. Connection, for the forest, is not something it does. It is something it simply, continuously, is. The way breathing is something a body is, rather than something it remembers to perform. This way of living is not the exception on Earth. It is the rule. The reefs, grasslands, the bacteria woven through your own gut. Life almost everywhere turns out to be life held together, sustained less by standing alone than by the threads running between. The lone survivor was always a story we told. The truer picture, wherever we look closely, is a web, and the web is older and far more common than the legend of the one who needs no one. To belong to a network is the oldest condition of being alive. Long before there were trees, before there were forests, the first living things already pooled what they had and leaned on one another to last. You did not invent the longing to be connected. You inherited it from billions of years of life that learned, very early, that nothing endures alone for long. The wish to be joined is not a flaw in you. It is the oldest instruction life carries. The threads beneath a forest carry no memory of which tree gave and which received. They simply keep the whole alive. And perhaps that is the gentlest truth in all of it, that the giving need not be remembered, or earned, or repaid, to go on holding everything together. The web does not keep score. It only keeps connection. That has always been enough, and it asks nothing of you tonight but to let yourself be one more thing it holds. So when you stand among trees and feel, oddly, less alone, that feeling is not a trick of the mind. You are standing on something that is, at this very moment, sharing, signaling, sustaining, refusing to let its members face the dark by themselves. The forest is not a metaphor for connection. The forest is connection, made of wood and thread and patient, unbroken giving, running on beneath your feet while you simply stand and breathe above it. The instinct that pulls you toward others, that stirs even in a crowded room where no one knows your name, is not weakness and not yours alone. It is the same ancient logic that runs the wood wide web, the living rule that to be is to be joined You feel the pull to connect, because you are made of a world that has never, not once, survived any other way. The longing is not a flaw in you. It is the world in you, remembering what it is. So let this be the last thought to carry into sleep. You have never truly been alone, not for a single moment of your life. You are woven into the same vast, quiet web as the forests and the soil and every breath that ever passed between a leaf and a lung. The threads run through you as surely as they run through the trees. Tonight, you are held by all of it, and you always have been. The forest you began the night above has turned out to be a forest you were standing inside of all along. We followed the green canopy down past the bark, past the roots, into the dark, where the fungal threads do their patient work. And there, we found the seedling kept alive in deep shade by sugar from trees that would never know it, and the old tree letting its carbon drift back toward its neighbors as it died. What looked, from above, like a crowd of separate trunks competing for the light was always, beneath the soil, a single connected body, holding every part of itself at once. You came here perhaps feeling adrift in a crowded world. You can leave knowing that aloneness is the one thing the living earth has never actually built. Connection was here long before you, and it runs through you still. If the forest beneath the forest stayed with you tonight, and you would like the next quiet hour to find you, let this channel know you would like to come back. There are more unseen worlds waiting in the dark. Rest first. The rest of the soil will keep until you return. Picture the threads beneath a sleeping forest, still moving in the dark. Sugar drifting, tree to tree. Water rising silently. The whole web sharing, without a sound. That same slow giving runs through you now. In every cell, trading what it has with the cells beside it. Asking nothing of your effort. Let your entire being settle into that web of quiet exchange. Into the soil-dark hush, where nothing is separate and nothing is owed. You were always part of it. Let yourself sink back in. Feel yourself lowering now, the way warmth sinks slowly into the ground at the end of a long day, drawn down into something larger that has been waiting to receive it. Let your breath grow long and unhurried, each one a little softer than the last. There is nothing left to hold tonight. The threads beneath you are holding everything already, the way they always have. The next quiet hour is here, whenever you are ready for it. That video is waiting in the dark. No rush. No hurry. Only a slow path further down. Let your eyes stay closed and your body stay heavy. You are exactly where the web has carried you, and you may simply remain. Gentle soul, you have never once been alone. You are woven into all of it, held by the whole living earth. Sleep softly now. Good night.